Just today, hundreds of protesters at Columbia University staged an encampment to occupy the space of this university because of the repression on pro-Palestine activists across college campuses. We're not going away. People are not stopping until there's freedom and dignity for Palestinians.
Welcome to Overlap, brought to you by Wave Media. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Abby Martin, renowned American journalist, activist, and filmmaker, known for her independent media work. And she's the director for Gaza Fights for Freedom and Empire Files. Welcome, Abby.
Thank you so much for having me.
So just now, I was watching your interview with Piers Morgan. Notice he's pushing very hard for your response to have an opinion on the Israel and Palestine conflict right now. Because your answer was there's no equal side, but obviously got no time to elaborate on that. Would you please elaborate on your whole opinion on this Israel and Palestine conflict right now?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really good question because the entire Western media, as well as the entire Western world, essentially, is defining this conflict as a quote unquote war between Israel and Hamas, which could not be further from the truth. You cannot have a war against a people that you yourself are occupying militarily. And that's precisely what we see happening. So Israel is the occupying, colonizing force that is subjugating 5 million Palestinians under the boot of its authorities. You have 3 million people in the West Bank that are denied basic human rights, living under a fascist military dictatorship. And in Gaza, there's 2 million Palestinians living under a medieval siege that is occupied completely militarily by the outside. Israeli authorities control every aspect of Palestinian life, no matter what area they are living in. You cannot have a war against an armed resistance group that does not have the same military capabilities. Israel is one of the most powerful militaries on the planet. It's armed to the teeth with US weaponry. And, it has an air force, it has an armada of land vehicles. Hamas does not have any of that. Hamas has rudimentary weapons that it uses against this heavily fortified military force. So there is no equality when it comes to this so-called war. It is essentially just confining millions of Palestinians in an open air prison and relentlessly bombing them, as well as having starvation take root because Israel allows what goes in and out of the Gaza Strip. So they're purposefully and intentionally starving millions of Palestinians, denying them the mobility to actually leave the Strip, and then indiscriminately bombing them. So a lot of genocidal acts on top of each other, and Israel absolutely needs to be stopped.
So in one sentence, how can you defend yourself on occupied land? Right. Well, on that, according to UNGA Resolution 3070 of 1973, I quote, reaffirms the legitimacy of people's struggle for liberation from colonial and foreign domination and alien subjugation by all available means, including armed struggle, end of quote. So if that is legit and resolution, this armed struggle in the context is obviously distinguished from acts of terrorism, right? Because a lot of my Western friends, they support Israel. They believe securitization is the best way to legitimize what Israel is doing in Palestine because they believe Hamas symbolizes terrorism and whatever method used on terrorism can be justified.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of misconceptions about what is going on. I think a lot of people don't realize that for decades, Palestinians have tried to mobilize peaceful, nonviolent resistance. And I think that we can look at the period of 2017, 2018 of the Great March of Return, where thousands of Palestinians within Gaza went to peacefully protest with nothing except Palestinian flags that were raised at this fortified border fence, where Israeli soldiers have authorized themselves to shoot to kill if people stray too close to the fence. What happened over several months was that Israeli snipers were perched up on top of sand dunes and they just picked off Palestinians over and over again as if it was target practice. They shot dead with sniper rifles, children, medics, Journalists marked press very clearly, disabled people in wheelchairs. All of these people posed no threat to Israeli soldiers whatsoever, but they were simply massacred just the same, very methodically so. I mean, we're talking about picking people off one by one as if it's a turkey shoot. So, basically, what the West and what people who defend Israel in this case want is Palestinians to die peacefully and quietly. So, we can look at October 7th through historical lens and realize that inevitably violence will erupt in unfortunate ways if people are denied basic human rights. So, I do not condemn the armed resistance that's actually fighting against genocidal onslaught right now and keeping Palestinians alive. I can understand historically why things happen and why October 7th happened. And that's because Palestinians have tried every avenue possible to peacefully resist and to peacefully declare that they need human rights. And they've been ignored on the international stage for decades.
And we see great endeavor trying to prevent the great public all over the world from knowing what's actually happening. We live in a world right now that whomever trying to describe objectively what's happening in Gaza, being labeled in all kinds of Nazi figures like Wehrmacht, like Gestapo, depending on how their description could critically damage Zionism or their implementation for further war crime. So if I quote ICJ Irish lawyer Benny Ni Hawley said, its people, means Gaza people, are witnessing daily threats to their very existence while the world watches on. To me, it seems like the world does not want to just watch on, but those reporting, those helping people to know what's actually happened, reporters, cooks, medical suppliers, doctors, MSF, WCK, and UNRWA, they sacrificed most workers in recent years. Even they are killing reporters. We don't see news agencies most strongly condemning IDF, but instead they're trying to promote still anti-human atrocities as anti-terrorism or spread of democracy. I think it's extraordinary to me, but frankly, I use extraordinary just because it's beyond my English vocabulary limit. But as a content creator, I believe a lot of your content got banned from YouTube or other content platform. So where do you see the way out? The voice can be heard by the great public.
Yeah, I mean, Israel has relied for decades on weaponizing the notion of anti-Semitism and conflating criticism of Israel with the notion that you're anti-Semitic if you dare to criticize the only Jewish state. It's really unfortunate that this has been a strategy that has worked for so long because it's put a lot of pro-Palestinian advocates on the defense because naturally we care about anti-Semitism, we care about the plight of Jewish people, and we care about racism and bigotry. And so for decades, we've had to explain why anti-Semitism is not criticism of Israel. But I think that finally the world is seeing Israel's mask removed, which is a brutal occupying force that is an apartheid state. I mean, this is a crime against humanity. It is actively committing genocide against the Palestinian people. So I don't think that that label and accusation sticks any longer. But unfortunately, Israel's acting in such a brazen manner because they're shrouded with impunity from the United States empire. The United States is the most powerful military force in the world. Israel knows that the United States is in their corner, and so they've acted with extreme belligerence, killing over 100 journalists and media professionals, many in targeted assassinations, decimating the entire medical infrastructure in Gaza, killing doctors alongside their entire families, many in targeted assassinations, aid workers. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's pretty much the most dangerous place in the world to be this, that, and the other. My YouTube channel, Breaking the Set, that was hosted on Russia Today, it was blanketly banned in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine because we were told by big tech media giants that our reality needed to be sanitized and that we are children and that we needed to be told what is and what is not Russian propaganda. So all of my 600 plus episodes, a lot of which were critical of Russia, were just memory hold forever from the internet, removed from the ability to watch them. So I've been through the rigor of censorship online. The best place I could see of getting our voice out is getting in the streets, mobilizing with your community, and trying to amplify the voices that are at the heart of this conflict. But, it's very hard because tech algorithms, the way that the internet's structured today and the way that social media operates, it's very dangerous and difficult because at any point, arbitrarily, your accounts can be completely removed and all of your work can be erased. And we know that, with TikTok, Instagram and Facebook, they've admittedly been working with the Israeli government and the US government for quite some time. I think TikTok is a little bit more independent. And so we see that there's a vicious attempt to shut down TikTok in the US. It actually has widespread bipartisan support in Congress because of the allegation that it's somehow, infiltrated by the CCP and going to be data mining us to give our information to the Chinese government. It's pretty ludicrous, but I think it just shows how desperate the ruling class is to control every avenue and aspect of information. And I think TikTok is one of the last kind of gasps of a free flow of information, real time, coming from the genocide. And so people are seeing for the first time in their lives, Palestinians being able to dictate their own reality and show the world what their lives are really like, when for so long Israel's controlled the narrative.
Okay, two questions on that. You mentioned your episodes being banned by YouTube. So if you're having the opportunity here to condense your contents blocked by so-called mainstream media, what's the very message you want to tell the world?
Yeah, so for 3 years, I was working at Russia Today and I was covering social grievances within the United States. The reason that I went to work for state-funded media is because the corporate-owned media acts as an arm of US foreign policy. It dictates to Americans and other audiences in the West who is and who is not our enemy, who's our ally and who's our adversary. And that's because the very same media institution that is supposed to be teaching us and educating the American public instead propagandizes us and manufactures consent for the United States being a global military empire and subjugating tens of millions of people under its rule around the world with sanctions, bombings, occupations, and just economic and financial control through global capitalism perpetrated by the West. So, what I did on my show at Russia Today was talk about the things that corporate media simply does not give the space or time to amplify the people who are most impacted by US foreign policy. Talk about social movements that are not taken seriously by corporate media. Talk about US foreign policy that's not taken seriously by corporate media. Corporate media is subsidized and funded by the very same institutions that journalists should be working to expose. It's subsidized by oil corporations, banks, and defense contractors. And it's really unfortunate because there is no money for investigative journalism in the US. So, someone like me, who's a harsh critic of US foreign policy, a staunch anti imperialist advocate journalist, there's really limited options for me to go into the media and tell these simple truths about my country. So, I went to Russia Today and I was simply talking about, things like Occupy Wall Street, other candidates in our two-party system, third-party candidates, talking about socialism, talking about all of these things that, RT was exploiting because of the journalistic failures of Western media and corporate media. But, cynically or not, it was a space for people like me to advocate for these issues and to agitate against what I think is very catastrophic foreign policy. Instead of this foreign policy, we should be cooperating globally with countries like Russia and China and working together on things like climate change and global sustainability. My message is that censorship is never the answer. And I feel like, our foreign policy is taking us down a very, very dark path. And especially with the genocide in Gaza that our government is overseeing, it could put us on the doorstep of regional war and possibly World War III.
Okay, very interesting. So, me as a Chinese, when I look at atrocities happening in Gaza, not only I feel very sad, but also it reminds me of my country's history. At, when we had Japanese invasion and they used anthrax, putting kanjis, giving to not actually refugees but citizens. They lie to them. This is Japanese military kindness, and they have this anthrax kanji. They get sick, and they write those death roll into research paper, finally got offer from American university being professors and stuff. So I made those videos on YouTube, still got banned, they got censored, they got demonetized. So I feel kind of like overlap with what's happening right now in Gaza because when we have history classes, my teacher would tell me that nobody's caring about this in the world. And when we talk about Gaza, now a lot of people get bored. It really horrifies me because I thought every daily 200 citizens got killed in Gaza, and people still looking at New York Times front page, the how to cook perfect Italian food recipes and red tapes, professors talking about abstract concepts in international law that has nothing to do with stopping atrocity, ceasefire right now. I feel horrified. What's the actual way out? And talking about U.S. policy, U.S. Diplomatic policy, I have a number prepared here. Since 1945, a total of 36 Security Council draft resolutions related to Israel-Palestine have been vetoed by one of the P5. Out of these, 34 were vetoed by the US. So that's very blatant shielding of Israel and blocking any chance for Palestine statehood. As we both know right now, today, I believe, or the day after tomorrow, we're going to have a vote in Security Council for Palestine statehood. Everybody think US going to veto again. So if the US policy is shielding Israel and they're sharing portion of white supremacy and American exceptionalism with Israel, is there any chance we can cease fire, save citizens, children in Gaza without fighting with American exceptionalism or American hegemony?
I mean, I share your frustration and horror, honestly, every day. We're talking about 6 months into this, and I have friends there, and one of my friends, his wife is pregnant, and they all have little kids, and everyone's lost something. Everyone has experienced the horror on the ground, and they're never going to be the same. 19,000 little kids that are orphaned now, they have no surviving friends or family to take after them. 10 to 15 little kids are getting their legs or hands amputated every single day because the bombs just keep dropping and the illness just keeps spreading that's preventable. I never thought that I would be living in a world in 2024 that the world could collectively watch this unfold live streamed to us and that no action would be taken. The US has an incredible stranglehold on the international diplomatic process. And yes, the US is, retaliatory methods and is basically blackmailing the world to be able to prevent any action from being taken. But still, I feel very disappointed in humanity that not more global leaders are stepping up to put an end to this once and for all, because everyone can relate on a human level. No one wants to see children dying. And this is not a war. This is a war on children, and this is a manufactured starvation and genocide happening in our names. And it's absolutely a disgrace. It's a disgrace and a stain on humanity. I mean, I think that even though the US has vetoed almost every single resolution because of its veto power at the UN Security Council for so long to shield Israel from accountability, I do think things are changing. I think that there's an international mobilization that's putting Palestine at the forefront. And it's a beautiful thing because it's solidarity. Because this isn't something that impacts Americans directly, but you still see millions of Americans taking direct action out in the streets day in and day out, 6 months in. Civil disobedience. Just today, hundreds of protesters at Columbia University staged an encampment to occupy the space of this university because of the repression on pro-Palestine activists across college campuses. We're not going away. People are not stopping until there's freedom and dignity for Palestinians. And it goes far beyond just a ceasefire. At this point, if you're calling for a ceasefire, that's literally the most basic thing that you can do. At this point, there has to be a demand of Palestinian liberation and freedom and democracy. And it doesn't mean the erasure of Israelis. It means the incorporation of Palestinians into the human rights and democratic process, because right now they are not incorporated and they are denied democratic rights. So I think that things are changing. The pressure is mounting on an incredible level to US politicians. US politicians can't even go outside without being harassed and followed and basically just told that they're backing genocide, and how could they live with themselves? So I think that they're getting sick of it. You hear long-standing staunch Zionists decrying Biden's policies. They're getting sick of it. People like Chuck Schumer. Biden himself made it very clear that he was not going to be pulled into Israel's attempt to go with an all-out war against Iran several days back. So even though Biden is an unapologetic Zionist who has been overseeing and facilitating this genocide for 6 months by just supplying Netanyahu with whatever he wants, I think that the latest round of negotiations and the ceasefire resolution that happened a couple weeks back, where the first US abstention happened, I think that really signified a shift, a tidal shift in policy, that the people are not going to go away until this ends. And there was some rift at the top. Even if Biden doesn't want to say it, people around him are obviously putting pressure on him that this needs to end. So, I'm not sure where it's going to go, but a ceasefire is needed immediately. But for long-term liberation, that's an absolute necessity to end the conflict once and for all.
Because Trump and his followers are Israel fanatic, basically. They will support anything Israel do, comparing to Blinken, Biden, and Schumer, Pelosi, etc. So, what's your view on possible influence of 2024 if Trump or his so-called red wave would possibly affect U.S. policy and the current trend shifting?
I mean, unfortunately, in the United States, we have two parties that are feasible parties that we're told that we can buy into. One party puts forward the veneer of progressivism, but they essentially just adopt right-wing policies. And if not overtly right-wing, they just embrace status quoism. So nothing will change. We just have to keep things the way they are. And what that inevitably paves is a proto-fascist like a Donald Trump. So if Biden wins this time, it's just going to stave off the inevitability of a Trump next time because you're not really tangibly changing people's lives at all. You're just keeping things the way they are, and things right now are not good. I think that Gen Z, millennials, I think, Gen Xers, they're seeing the corporate media lying to them because they see with their own eyes what's happening in Gaza and they're being lied to by our media and by our political representatives. So there's a huge detachment, lack of investment in the political system, more so than ever. So I think that Biden will be punished in the election because we don't really have any other avenues, political avenues for change other than voting and just mass organizing and political presence on the streets like we have been. But because Biden has been so unmoving on this issue, and because people are so pissed off, I truly think that he will be punished in the election. I mean, he already was dragging his feet in almost every swing state, and now you see these unconfirmed votes coming in that are just pledging that they're not going to vote for Genocide Joe in several key states. But to your point, Trump is as bad, if not worse, and will be as bad, if not worse, on the subject of Israel. Trump is certainly no better, and in fact, he can go much further. We know that Trump assembled the most fanatical war cabinet possible with people like John Bolton, who clearly wants war with Iran. I mean, he was criticizing Biden for not going to war with Iran when Iran simply retaliated with kind of more symbolic strikes than anything else after Israel bombed the consulate building. So it's very scary to think of a Trump presidency. But at this point, I think that you're not going to convince Americans with a lesser of two evil explanation to continue to vote for Genocide Joe. People are upset, rightly so, and they're not looking to that hypothetical, what would Trump do in this situation? All they're doing is looking at what Biden is doing right now. Trump's not president. Trump's not overseeing the genocide, even though he would absolutely be doing the same thing, if not worse. Biden's doing it, and that's really all that matters to voters. And they're certainly not going to go reward Biden for doing this and not listening to any constituents across the nation who are decrying this as inhumane and horrific. And we clearly do not want this happening in our names, but Biden has clearly shown that he does not care. And in fact, he's willing to risk re-election entirely to continue with this insane policy.
So, in your opinion, what could be the solution for the current Israeli and Palestine conflict?
I can't speak for what the Palestinian people want. I know that there's a certain portion of Palestinians who would accept a two-state solution among 1967 borders. It's considered a formula of national consensus. That's according to Hamas's revised charter. That is for the Palestinians to decide. As someone who has been through the West Bank and seen the atomization of the different areas there and the control of the Israeli military, as well as the influx of illegal settlers that have taken root in the West Bank, it seems particularly impossible to establish a Palestinian state among the West Bank lines unless you were to evict all the settlers that live there, which I'm pretty sure is not going to happen. Unfortunately, we're looking at the Gaza Strip, which has been completely obliterated, intentionally so, simply because there's been an intentional display of not allowing Palestinian civil society to thrive after this genocidal onslaught is over. So the complete destruction of any medical infrastructure, all universities, mosques, any places of worship, civilian homes. I mean, you can't rebuild the Gaza Strip, right? You just can't. It's over. It's done. And so the world has allowed Israel to commit a crime at the same magnitude, if not worse, than the initial Nakba, the initial ethnic cleansing that created the foundation of Israel. So, in terms of the second Palestinian state, I mean, first of all, it would be hard to incorporate Gaza because it's just randomly over here. But at this point, you would have to just open up the borders and not have this exclusive Jewish state and be able to incorporate all peoples that live there and open democracy for them all. So one state, one vote, equal rights for all, I feel like is the way for the future and the only way to end the violence once and for all.
Well, it's very fruitful discussion with you, Abby. Thank you for your time and justice prevail.
Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for what you do.